Hi guys, Red Pill Biker here, and I'm just going to continue on with my story and hopefully wrap that part of what I've been talking about here in the next few videos. But today I want to talk about 2.5 decades of gaslighting. And I imagine most of you have heard that term before: gaslighting, getting gaslit, whatever. And if you haven't, it comes from an old movie. I think it came out like in the 30s or 40s, and I believe it was called Gaslighting or Gaslight. And in the movie, this husband was able to convince his wife that she was going insane, and so by the house they lived in had these old gas lights, and he would turn them up and turn them down and whatnot. I haven't seen the movie in forever. I don't remember exact context, but that's where the term gaslight comes from. And I spent 25 years being gaslit. And really what it means is when you come to somebody, in this case I would go to my wife, and I would have a complaint about our marriage. I would have a complaint about our relationship. And gaslighting isn't like you just look at somebody and say, you're wrong, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. It kind of it starts out that way, but it's far more subtle than that. It makes you really start to question, are you the problem? And you gotta remember, I was married to an attorney. This is a person who was trained in the art and manipulation of other people's minds. And I'll get to the point where I finally begin to pull my head out of my own ass. But gotta remember, I went into this thing without any knowledge of what I was getting into, without a whole lot of insight from other men, without any knowledge. And I took her at her face value. And I suppose maybe, I walked into a ready family. And, well, I had had a little brief marriage that lasted literally 90 days earlier. For all intents and purposes, this was a one and only marriage. A true, trying to be a grown-up marriage. I'll put it that way. And so I walked into a marriage with somebody I really didn't know that well. I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I met her and married her 90 days later. Because I just knew, man, I was all in love. I never took into account that all it was a flood of various kinds of brain chemicals. And so we had this real passion and affection, very touchy-feely. And I don't mean just sex, but she was an extremely affectionate person. And that was withdrawn from me literally instantaneously. I mean, like on the honeymoon night. And, first you just come at it like you're angry because all of a sudden something's been taken from you. But if somebody is a good manipulator, and women, I think, are far better at this than men are. Men, we're a little bit more up in your face kind of a deal. Women are very subtle. They're very passively able to work on your mind. And so she began to convince me that the issues we were having in our marriage were me. And so I had to, a logical, reasonable person will at least stop and say, is it possible I truly am the problem? And so this began a long line of trying to become more of a person. Not for myself, but to attempt to rekindle that affection and love that we had shared initially. But when I would come to her and say, you know, there's no affection in this. Well, okay, there's this, that, and the other. Oh, okay, well, I'll go jump through that hoop. Or, you know, in time you start realizing there that there wasn't anything that I could do. And I'll cover this in a little more detail in my next video. But gaslighting is just a very subtle way, a very, very passive way, flying under the radar way of convincing the other person that they are at fault. And as I was saying earlier, I kind of jumped over a point I wanted to make. I walked in this marriage a little bit older in life, a little bit insecure about how to make this work. I was not a father, and she had these 3 little kids, and we got married so fast. And, you know, a bit of it might have had to do with the fact that she was, well, I had a bachelor's degree. She had, you know, a master's degree, and then she had a law degree. And so there's probably a little intimidation about that. And I didn't know what it was like to be married to an attorney. I really didn't know the life of an attorney. So I really was hoping to be at my best. And she was letting me know that not only was I not at my best, I wasn't nearly good enough. And so she withdrew all these things. So I began chasing after these things and became convinced that I was the problem. Now, this didn't last the whole 25 years, but it lasted for at least a couple of decades. But you do start to think to yourself, how can I be 100% the problem? And why is it affecting us, whatever it is? Because nothing that was mentioned, I mean, there was no abuse. I mean, we didn't even raise our voices to each other. I most certainly never laid a hand on her. She never laid a hand on me. I mean, so there was no complaints like that. I wasn't, because of my job, which was considered federal law enforcement, working at the prison, you know, there was no drug usage. I worked with people who did the drugs. I didn't do the drugs. There was no alcohol abuse. I mean, those things that you hear, I wasn't pissing away our money and doing silly things like that. I mean, the typical things that you hear in a marital counseling office, they just weren't there. And so over a period of time, I realized this is not really me. But when I would bring it to her, she would somehow turn it around. And after a while, you figure out that's just what you're doing. You're just using tricks that you've learned in law school and in court. And it wasn't beginning to work on me very much. You know, I do encourage people who may be in unhappy marriages to first do the one thing that you have complete and utter control over. And that is yourself and your actions and your perceptions and your thoughts and your speech. These things are under our control. Pretty much everything else is not. And so ask yourself that first. I mean, you'd do the same thing if you were at a job and you were getting some kind of low evaluations, or your boss is riding your ass or something like that. It would be easy to walk away and just say, the boss is a jerk. Well, you know, the first thing you might want to do is sit down and evaluate the quality of your work. Are you doing what they really want you to do? And I did that. I did that for a long time. I mean, I did that to where I went into see a couple of therapists. And the last one gave me the best advice. And I will get to that in a future video. It's not time to cover that. But that's what gaslighting really was. And that's what was happening to me. And an example would be, as I've mentioned before, this was a sexless marriage. And I have hit on that several times because it is a big deal. And it's a miserable lifestyle. I mean, even at 62, I could never be involved in a relationship with a woman if there wasn't intimacy involved. And it was horrible for a man in his early 30s. And it really didn't get, well, it never got any better. You know, you learn to turn it out. You know, you do the mental and emotional castration on yourself just to survive one more day. But if I ever brought this up, but I mean, you wouldn't be like, hey, honey, how come we haven't done it a week? It'd be like, hey, it's been 3 years. And, well, the only answer she could say is, well, you've got some kind of sexual problem. You've got a sex addiction. And I actually was like, well, I mean, I can't imagine that. I wasn't cheating on her. I wasn't going to strip clubs. I wasn't hiring hookers on the side. I mean, I was a golden retriever, guys. I was faithful, loyal, and true. I guess a golden retriever Boy Scout. And, but I went and, actually asked a friend of mine who was a psychologist. And of course, other people are looking at me like, you know what? You're a damn fool. And I think they really tried to communicate that, but I'm working so hard at this thing because I knew I only had control over one thing, and that was me. At least that's what I was thinking. But I encourage you, when somebody comes, if you're in a relationship and there's a complaint or something's happened, the first person to evaluate is the only one that really matters, and that's yourself. And if you do a true evaluation on yourself, as I did over a long period of time, and I did kind of finally figure it out, guys, but I was still determined to stick this thing out because that's what people are supposed to do. But if you go through that process and the other person, it isn't you, it's pretty much got to be the other person. But the hoops I jumped through, the things I went through, trying to win back her affection, her admiration, her respect, they were unbelievable. I'm not sad that I did them, because I think those things, trying to make yourself a better man, even if it is for another person, my motivation was off, but the results were good. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about gaslighting, and that's how it went in my marriage for 20 years. And the last 5 were just, I didn't even buy into it, and it became even more miserable, because if you at least partially think it's your responsibility, then you feel like you might have a handle on fixing the problem. But if it isn't your responsibility, you truly have no control over it. Because when you're in a relationship, and let me point this out, and I'll wrap this video up. You're not in a relationship. You're not in a relationship. I don't care if you're dating, you're married, even with your best buddy hanging out. You're in 2 relationships. You've got your relationship with her and her relationship with you. And they're 2 totally different things. They may overlap enough to where you can have a good and contented and fulfilling relationship. I don't think it happens nearly as much as it used to, or it doesn't. But the only part of that equation, your relationship with her, her relationship with you, this is the only one you have control over. And if you don't have control over every aspect of a decision, a goal, or a choice in your life, then you don't have control over it. And it is outside of your control. It's outside of your hands to fix it. Anyway, guys, life is hard. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Keep it real, guys.